So I want to say a few things about how Aristotle ends up this work, of which we've read actually quite little. I mean, I think we've looked at what I consider to be the highlights of the work if we're going to read it, in a short period of time. It's actually a fairly thick book and a fascinating book, a book that has occupied scholars, readers of philosophy for thousands of years. But the second part of this reading is quite different from the first, I guess. I mean, the first has to do with pleasure, and I guess it is related because in the first part, asking those questions, is pleasure the good, and then moving on to the question, well, really, what is pleasure? Is it even a viable candidate for the good in the sense of being the greatest good? We see that he has his reasons for rejecting it. That is, the life of pleasure can't be the greatest life, the best life, the life that a human being should aspire to. It's not the greatest good. Then, if it's not, then what is? Well, I think that his answer is pretty incredible. And we can go back to a very important part of an earlier reading. This idea of the function of a human being. Remember, the word function is ergon. The proper activity. Sorry. And proper in the sense of what belongs to the human being. What is the human by nature meant to do? And this is, of course, part of Aristotle's way of answering this question. What is happiness? God, I'm sorry, can't type. And his idea is that human happiness, or true human happiness, really authentic, the deepest, highest form of human happiness, will be an engagement in an activity which is proper to human beings, which belongs to human beings, which they are by nature fitted to. There's all sorts of things that we can do, but maybe there's only one thing that we uniquely as a species are meant to do. And we saw that it was rational activity that he thought was the unique characteristic, or the unique kind of thing that a human being could do and was meant to do. And in this, you'll see that in this reading, contemplation. I believe that the Greek is theoria. Obviously, we get various words in English: theory, theoretical. Theoria, or contemplation, is very important in Plato too. It's this idea of being occupied with reality, or being in the presence of truth, which is, gets us into all sorts of different territory. But it's an operation of the intellect. And Aristotle is not only a traditional thinker, Aristotle is one of those thinkers who defines the tradition. The idea that human beings are rational animals. And what that really means is that it's rationality which defines us. It's rationality which makes us what we are. So it's not surprising that at the end of this book, in this almost grandiose way, Aristotle argues that the best life, the happiest life, the most praiseworthy life, is the life devoted to reason, thinking, intellectual matters. It is, believe it or not, the life of the philosopher. Widely understood, right? I mean, anybody who was concerned with knowledge, reason, science, discovery, seeking wisdom of any sort was considered a philosopher in those days. Um, and anybody who uses their intellectual abilities to the fullest extent that they can, I think that that's his answer. That's the best life. But there's always qualifications. Aristotle is an incredibly realistic, moderate thinker. Here he on page 9, where he's basically saying that the life of contemplation, the life of knowing, of knowledge, of living with discovering truth is the highest life. But he recognizes that, well, that's because we have intellect, and it's this unique characteristic of human beings. It must be what we were meant to do. But he also recognizes that we're not just intellect. Right? That is that that's why there's moral virtue and not just intellectual virtue, because we are feeling animals as well as being rational animals. And so much of the moral virtues has to do with our feelings, developing the right habits, learning how to feel pleasure at the right things, not to not feel pleasure at all, but to feel pleasure in the right way, at the right things, at the right time, and pain too. So he recognizes that, uh, you know, does he say, but in a secondary degree, the life in accordance with the other kind of virtue is happy. And the other kind of virtue is moral virtue, right? I mean, you don't have to be an intellectual to be happy, is what he's saying. Thank goodness for us, right? I mean, you don't have to be a theoretical mathematician, a chess grandmaster, um, a physicist, a metaphysical philosopher, a theologian in order to be happy. Human beings use their intellects to live their lives practically. And that's what, to a large degree, the moral virtues are about, being thoughtful about how you live your practical life. That is a legitimate form of human happiness. That is using your reason, but not to discover the nature of, the universe, not to do physics or solve intricate mathematical theorems, but just being thoughtful about your life, thinking, using your mind. I like that. I mean, I think that that's very good. But he does say that the best life of all would be a purely contemplative life, a life totally devoted to reason, to thinking, to engaging in that kind of, everyone's experienced it. If you're really clicking intellectually, solving a math problem, writing a paper, just thinking about a problem really hard, using your mind in such a way that you really feel like things are really cooking, that's the kind of activity that he's talking about. And, it has theological implications. If I can find it, uh, because he basically says that's the kind of life that the gods live. There's a whole section of another book he wrote called The Metaphysics where he talks about God. And I think that he really did believe there was one God, not the pantheistic religion, no, polytheistic religion of the Greeks. He really thought there was one God, and he described the activity of that God as pure thought. And that's how he describes the life of the gods here. Let me see. Sorry. I'll just find it. Yeah, he says here, therefore, the activity of God, if you can see it right here, which surpasses all others in blessedness, must be contemplative. And of human activities, therefore, that which is most akin to this must be most of the nature of happiness. That is, there's actually something quite reminiscent of Christian, Jewish, Muslim, any monotheistic theology, not just monotheism, Hinduism too, that human beings are finite creatures and can only partially experience the kind of things that God experiences to the fullest. So God is pure thought. We human beings can't be pure thought. We are too complex for that. We have bodies, we have desires, feelings, sensations, doubt. We make mistakes. We do things that are wrong. We have misguided, we're just wrong about things. Not just how we live our lives sometimes, but we're wrong about the truth of the universe. People used to think that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that everything revolved around it. They were wrong. Aristotle thought it, and he was wrong. Right? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I mean, we're limited, finite, and fallible, whereas God is perfect. But crucially, we can be like God insofar as we do use our intellects. We can be like God, God-like. And in fact, if you look at the traditional Christian interpretation or Catholic interpretation of Genesis, let's say from Thomas Aquinas, great medieval Catholic theologian, says, well, that's what it means to be made in God's image. It's a metaphor. It's not we literally look like God. We have certain attributes that are godlike, and he says they consist of intellect and will. That is the ability to reason and think, and the ability to make choices. We're both rational and free creatures, and that's what makes us godlike. So there's things in Aristotle which are certainly influence people like Thomas Aquinas, but are very reminiscent of Christian, modern, Jewish, Muslim, probably other theologies too, probably to a certain degree Hinduism. Similar idea. So that's what he says. I mean, he says that the happiest life, the most happy life, would be the life devoted to reason, to thinking, because that is the type of life that exercises the ergon, the proper activity of human beings to its fullest extent. Obviously, not all of us are capable of that. I would say that I'm not capable of that. But I am capable of sometimes being like that, like we all, using our minds, maybe not a life devoted to it. But I'm also capable of just using my reason to think about how I want to live my life, and that's something that we all do. But this greater, higher happiness is the one that he's holding up as being the happiest of all. So if we say, what is the human good? What is the greatest good? What is happiness? Aristotle doesn't really give us one answer. He gives us a more nuanced answer. Well, the happiest life of all will be the life totally devoted to reason. But that's either too high a thing for everybody or too high a thing for most of us. But in a secondary degree, the happy life is the life of virtue, which is the life of thoughtfully living. Not just living, but thinking about how you're living.